Web and SQL Hacking. In this nugget, we talk about web hacking, web application hacking, and SQL hacking. But before we start, I need to talk to you about several different things related to these last few exam objectives. And then we take a look also at the architecture of our web servers. We'll also take a look at specific web hacks, web application hacks, as well as SQL hacks. I guess I should put that in there too. And then also some demos that I'll show you here at the end. Alright, as I get started with this video, I'd like to welcome you and wish you a very happy holiday, whatever the holiday is, where you are right now. For us, we just finished a Christmas celebration here, and we had a wonderful, wonderful time as a family. One of the things that does irritate me, though, during Christmas time in the United States is that they have so many commercials that try to get you to buy so many things. For example, they have these diamond jewelry commercials where they have a man that's bought a woman a beautiful diamond pendant or necklace or a ring or something like this, and she sees it and it's just got, dramatic music plays and everybody's smiling and happy, and it leaves us normal guys feeling kind of like chumps if we don't buy our wives or our girlfriends expensive jewelry. Well, my wife watches those commercials as well, and usually when they come on, I try to kind of pretend as if I'm reading a security journal, but I can kind of see out of the corner of my eye that she looks over my way sometimes to see if I'm actually watching that commercial and getting the hint. Well, I got the hint, and I bought her a diamond necklace. Now, it doesn't look exactly like this one. I couldn't find an exact picture of it, but it looks maybe something like this, and this one actually sells for hundreds of dollars at the jewelry store near my home, but I couldn't afford this thing. So I snuck over to that same jewelry store, and you get the box that has the name of the jeweler on it and everything like that, and it just so happened that they had one that was going out the door for $19. Yes, folks, $19. I didn't even have to cheat my way or hack my way into their website to get that deal. Now, I never told my wife it was only $19, but when it comes to hacking websites, if I decided I really wanted to cheat the system, I could probably do that. Because you see, there are ways of manipulating some of these things, especially on websites that are not very well protected. Now, before we get started, I want to talk about the last several modules. You might have gone through this series and looked at it and said, well, it looks like James covers maybe one or two modules in each video, but we've got a lot of modules left, and we're already on, I think this is the 19th video that I'm shooting. So it seems as if, wow, we have a long ways to go. In reality, we don't, and why is that? Many of the exam objectives, or the modules as they're called in the Certified Ethical Hacker, if I bring them over here, you can see them, many of them are compressed and compacted and addressed all here at the end. For example, in this particular nugget, we're going to be talking about hacking web servers, hacking web applications, and SQL injection. A lot of that is all covered, kind of, killing three birds with one stone, so to speak. And so that part of it is going to go pretty quickly. Also, there's some other things to address with this as well, okay, as we get started here. Much of the stuff that we have already addressed in the past is also covered in those same modules. For example, another upcoming module, I think it's module 19, talks about pen testing. Well, guess what? That's what we've been doing pretty much the whole time here. So we've already got a pretty good education in penetration testing and how to do it. And I talked to you about some of the legal aspects and some of the procedural aspects of that early in this series in one of the intro videos. So that's really module 19 there. It's already been pretty well covered. Just for reference, I'll put, module 19 out here, if I can write. Then there's buffer overflow. This is actually module 17, and this is something we've already also addressed to a great degree, because it's buffer overflows. Most of what Metasploit does is some form of a buffer overflow. And a lot of the specific exam objectives in terms of the bullet points that you'll see there, they've really already been covered in various ways throughout this whole series. So that's module 17 there. Then we also have things like intrusion detection systems. I'll cover that a little bit more, especially with Snort in an upcoming video. But this has already also been addressed in various videos. And, firewalls, things like that. We've talked about that in many of the other topics throughout this series. I think that's module 16. Yeah, module 16. It also addresses honeypots, which I haven't addressed yet, but which can kind of be part of IDS. Just to give you a preview there, we'll be addressing that in the future, and one of the key tools you use there is Snort. Okay. Also, a lot of the upcoming content that we'll talk about here, as I said before, it all consolidates. Like the web hacking, web applications, SQL injection. We're kind of going to kill three birds with one stone. So we're really mostly covering, I'll just put it up here, mostly modules 12 13, and 14, which are hacking web servers, hacking web applications, and also SQL injection. Also, I want to put your mind at ease a little bit, especially with these objectives, when it comes to things like SQL injection and hacking web applications. You kind of get the feeling that in order to be effective at that, you have to know how to do web programming, or you have to know how to do SQL programming, or really be an expert at SQL in order to be able to do some of this stuff. In reality, there's little or no programming knowledge necessary, or no SQL knowledge is really necessary at all. All you really need to do is to kind of know how to go through some lines of code and look for something that seems suspicious. I'm going to kind of train you how to do that a little bit, mostly in the study guide that's available also for you up on nuggetlab.com. Now, certainly, if you are a programmer, or if you do have an expert knowledge of SQL, this will put you several steps ahead. However, in terms of the exam objectives and being able to perform certain kinds of hacks, you do not have to be experts in those ideas or in those technologies. I'm certainly not an expert in some of these things as well. I know, some of that, and I can probably go through some lines of code and identify or interpret what it's doing. However, I'm not a black belt in SQL. I'm not a black belt in web programming or any of that kind of stuff. I'm more like a white belt or a yellow belt. And yet, I'm still able to pull off some pretty good hacks, and you'll see some demos of that coming up. All right, then as we move along here, let's talk a little bit about web architecture. Now, the next several whiteboards are mostly just going to be background information for you, and then I'm going to show you some demos, as I usually do, at the end of the video with some practical ways to exploit some of these things. Now, first of all, just remember, these are some basics that you probably already know, that when you open up a web page, it uses the Hypertext Transfer Protocol over port 80 for unencrypted sessions. If you have an encrypted session using TLS, or Transport Layer Security, then that's going to be HTTPS. Okay, and that uses port 443. Again, not rocket scientists for people at this level, but just as a reminder, that's what we've got there. Also, when the client requests data, they do so with a GET request. Okay, that's how you get data. It's very similar to some things you would do with FTP and some other programs as well, even from a command line. But overall, when you open up a web page, it's because you have sent a GET request, behind the scenes somewhere, to that web server, and then it will send it back to you. There's also posts that we can talk about here as well, but I'll get to that in a little while. The main vendors for web architecture are going to be Apache servers, and it can use something like a Tomcat to manage the Apache servers. There's also Microsoft's own IIS, or Internet Information Server. Now, this is something that is definitely got some weaknesses, as well as Apache. People kind of jump on the Microsoft bandwagon and target them quite a lot, and that's kind of been deserved, especially in early versions of IIS, especially a decade ago with NT4 and so on. But it has gone increasingly more secure with each iteration of IIS, and at the time of this recording, we're on version 7.5. I'm sure there's still some vulnerabilities there, and you can probably still find some ways of smashing the stack there, or using Metasploit exploits or something like this. However, they're harder to find than they used to be, and they're not quite so obvious. Apache, though, it does actually have some well-known vulnerabilities as well, so just because it's not a Microsoft product doesn't mean that it is secure inherently. Also, there's many potential vulnerabilities that could be worked out with this as well. For example, there might be a malicious or a deceptive GET or POST request. We're going to see this performed a couple of different ways in demonstrations here at the end, where we might request data from a web server. Maybe there's a form to fill out or something like that. And then when we fill out the form, we send it back to the server. We send it back with a POST. Well, you can manipulate the data that goes back so that it might be data that would not normally be accepted by the server, but you can manipulate it to send back whatever you want to, pretty much. There's also SQL injection, and this is going to really relate to poorly designed SQL apps, or using web servers that don't have good protection for your SQL database. This also is a broad and well-known vulnerability. In fact, the anonymous hacker group, they just recently hacked another organization, we presume through some kind of SQL injection, and then were able to download thousands. They said over 2 gigabytes worth of credit card numbers from a specific source. And it was, again, embarrassing because the place they downloaded them from, it was a company that specialized in internet security, and yet they said that the credit card numbers were not even encrypted. Wow. Anyway, if you successfully run SQL injection, it might take only a few moments. It's not like you have to hack away at it for months at a time. Once you find the vulnerability, you might be able to get away with hundreds of megabytes or even gigabytes of data in just moments of time, depending on your bandwidth. So there's lots of vulnerabilities there for web architecture. Just stay tuned. I'm going to show you a specific website that reveals a lot of that to us here later on. So when it comes to web hacks specifically, there's many different vectors that you can attack from. One of those would be, for example, a buffer overflow. Now, one of the things you want to keep in mind for exam purposes is if you just see an example of what buffer overflow might look like is, I think I have a web page here. There we go. This is from ExploitDB, which remember is a great source for looking for a lot of this kind of stuff. But anyway, we can see here, this is the key thing, where we see all this gobbledygook. When you see a whole kind of a dense stack of a bunch of code there that just looks like it really has no meaning, it just goes on and on and on and on, that's very often an indication of a buffer overflow attack. And remember, as a quick review, what happens with a buffer overflow is this. Let's say this represents my memory, and my memory is being used right now by some data, some programs, some other programs, and so on up to here, let's say. And let's say we have malicious code that we want to shoot into this memory stack. What we can do is to forcibly shoot in a whole bunch of nonsense, like this right here. We shoot in a whole bunch of nonsense, and then on the tail end of that, we can have our malicious code that gets in, and now it gets into a usable memory space that we can then execute. That's a little oversimplified, and there's various ways of doing that. But anyway, that's the kind of the idea there, is to force our kind of malware into a memory space. Very often, this is going to be memory that's controlled by the system, which means that it'll have full system access and it won't be limited by any kind of user privilege. All right, there's also things such as directory traversal. This is something that could be just deliberately, or rather neglected, and left open. For example, when you configure IIS, you can specify whether or not directory browsing is allowed. Almost always, you don't want to allow that to happen, because they could be able to then browse other directories on that server that you don't want the internet public to be able to see. It might have confidential information in it, or just be, nobody else's business. And then by way of example here, I've just gone to IIS 7 on one of my servers, and on the default website, or any website that you really select, I guess, you could go down here to, where is it? I just saw it a minute ago. The directory browsing right here. And this is where you could specify whether or not you allow directory browsing. Now, unfortunately, with IIS for many generations now, they disable this. So if I double click on that, we'll see that directory browsing has been disabled. But if someone, for some reason, and normally this is going to be because of a troubleshooting issue with the website, they may temporarily enable that because they just need to get from A to B or something like that, and they need to be able to dig away through the website somehow. It's not really a very good practice to do that even temporarily, and if you have to do this, you may not know much about web programming anyway, or web design. However, maybe they turned this on and then they forgot about it and they just left it enabled. Once that happens, and I'm going to quickly disable this before I forget, once that happens, then it leaves the whole server open and vulnerable to directory browsing. Now, one of the ways that you can do this directory traversal is you can even type this in the browser URL, and you would just type something in like .. // What that does, every time as you type that in, it's very similar to what you would do in a command prompt. Or if you were to do something like a cd .. it would take you up a directory level. Or cd, /, that would take you to the root, for example. Well, with this takes me up one directory level with one .. /, 2 directory levels with the next one, 3 directory levels, 4 directory levels, and so on. And what will happen here is there's some little applications that you can download from the internet that will kind of automate this for you. And it'll try 1 directory level up and to see if there's anything interesting. And it'll try 2 directory levels and 3 directory levels and so forth. Now, there are intrusion detection software products that will easily seize upon these in a URL. If it sees any of this kind of stuff in a URL, it'll just kill the connection because it'll know that it's a directory traversal attempt. Well, what you can do to help obfuscate that is to make it a Unicode directory traversal instead. Now, a lot of IDSs are also trained to look for this sort of a thing, but if you convert these things to Unicode, then it looks like this instead. Okay, so that will equal, a .. /. Okay, in order to make a dot dot slash in Unicode, you would type all of this in right through here. Also, there's something here called parameter tampering or URL tampering. This is where if you know what is going to be sent to the website, for example, here if I'm banking at Nugget Lab Bank, then what might happen here is if I can observe some traffic and see how this URL appears that we're transferring to a specific account number, and I'm just making these numbers up, from a specific account number, and we're specifying this amount of dollars, then what I might be able to do is to hold up this post, and instead of allowing it to be sent on, I can hold it up and transfer to a different account number. I might change this to 7825, and maybe I'll change this to $20,000. Okay. Now this is a pretty weak. In fact, a lot of these things are pretty weak web design, and I don't think you're going to find a bank specifically that allows that, but there might be some smaller online retailers or something like that that may allow something like this because they have not properly designed their website. There's also URL obfuscation. Now, some of these things that you'll see here, such as the directory traversal, these URL tampering, things like that, there's a lot of IDSs that might be able to pick that up. So what we have to do is to conceal what we're doing. So we might do something like change it to a specific IP address. Then instead of going to a specific IP address, we want to convert that to binary and then back to decimal. And just by doing that, there's something called URL obfuscation. What I mean by that is this. Let's say that I've got this IP address that I want to connect to. And normally maybe something like the IDS software or something like that will make a direct connection to an IP address. That's kind of a no-no in terms of security. You usually don't want to use an IP address to make a connection. Usually it has to be something like a URL that has to be translated from host name to IP address by DNS. So anyway, if I'm trying to connect to this IP address, then what I might do is to convert this to binary, which I can't put in the web browser, and then convert it back to a single 32-bit value like this. Okay, and then this would be my single 32-bit binary value. What I'll do then is I'll take that and I'll convert that back to a decimal value. Now you can do all of this using calculator, and that's what I've done here. I just used calculator to come up with all of this, converting back between binary and decimal and so on. And I've took the commas out, of course, the thousands separators. And then what I would do is to make that connection, I would just type in http:// and then that specific number, which would actually be equivalent of this number, and very often you might be able to make that connection on unguarded websites. Now then again, if you see an exam question similar to this, it might be a little bit baffling because you might have to work with all these binaries, but if they give you access to the calculator, this will certainly make it easier. But even if they don't, remember that this is actually just going to be a basic binary math. And that's not something I'm going to teach you specifically here, but just as a quick review, it's on the number line, so to speak, for binary, you have 8-bit positions. Let me just say 6, 7, 8-bit positions here. If I turn on the first one, that's the equivalent of a 1. Not because it's a 1, but because that 1 that you see right there means to turn it on. So that means that the first value is turned on. The value of the first one is a 1, the second one is a 2, and then it keeps doubling. 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Okay? And then 128. So each one of these doubles. So let's just do that another way. If I were to see something like this, what would that mean in decimal? Well, that would be a 128 because only the first binary bit is turned on. So you have to know a little bit about doing that sort of thing. Another thing that might make it a little bit easier is if they show you just the combined 32-bit value like this right here, anytime it ends in a 0, it's always going to be an even number original IP address. If it ever ends in a 1 like that, then it will always be equivalent to an odd IP address. So that might be handy and help you to run through that quickly. If you see a number that ends in this, like this, and all of the answers for the original IP addresses end in even numbers except for 1, then you know immediately that that's got to be the right one because an odd number will have a 1 at the end of the single 32-bit value. Some other web hacks that you might look at here would be just viewing the source. This is not really directly a hack at all. It's just looking at publicly available information. Let me give you an example here. Oh, I was talking about jewelry earlier, and I kind of started daydreaming about this, and I thought, well, since I bought my wife that nice necklace, maybe she'll want to buy me this. Okay, so this is a nice little watch that I want to have. Mine costs a little bit more than what I paid for her, but I'm not going to tell her that. Anyway, so I'm kind of hoping maybe my wife gets me this. Maybe there's something sensitive in this page, though, that I could be able to see. So what I would do here is I would right-click. You can't really see that, so let me go over here. Right-click, and then I would choose to view the source. There it is. View the source. And that brings it up in a different page. And then we come over here, and then you just kind of have to go through it. It's a little bit of a needle in a haystack thing, but you have to just keep going through here and look for anything that might be sensitive. Sometimes you'll see password, and you can even do a search on this thing where you'll just search for, password as the full word. Sometimes it'll just PWD or pass, that sort of thing. You just kind of look for that kind of thing, because sometimes an administrator might have been careless with what they were doing, and sometimes different web applications and things may require an administrator password when you're first setting it up, but they don't require it when you actually post the information. So they may have left some administrator data in there that you'd be able to further exploit. Now, that website that I was just showing you where the watch is, I don't know of any vulnerabilities on that particular website. I just wanted to show you the watch. By the way, if my wife doesn't get that for me, my birthday is coming up in February, so I just wanted you all to be aware of that, just so that you can start saving in advance. What's going on with my screen here? It keeps zooming in. Okay. So anyway, you can look for sensitive things like that, usernames and passwords. Kind of skip this one, but you can also look for sensitive directories, because it could be pointing, maybe there's a GIF or an image file of some type on that page that points to a directory that you're not normally supposed to be able to see, because maybe that's where it's retrieving that GIF from, or it's pointing to it for some other reason, or it's pointing to a directory where there's a database located. Well, now you know where their database is, and you might do some kind of directory traversal to try to access it. Might also name other servers in there. Very often on websites, not everything is contained on that one website. A lot of the content can actually be stored on other servers. Well, now you can learn the names of the other servers that it's pointing to retrieve some of that data. Also, with passwords, there's a few tools that you can use for this. One of them is a cracker, and it's called THC Hydra. You can just Google for that and look at it if you want to, but that's just one way of cracking passwords. There's also Brutus, which is a brute force password cracker. This is not always completely successful. Remember, what a cracker does is it will take usually a hash, and it will keep running various combinations of passwords against that hash to see if it can get a match. A brute force will keep attempting to send credentials to the server until it finally gets an authentication that's successful. Well, a lot of IDSs are going to not really like that much, and so they could lock you out pretty quickly. But at least for your own internal testing, you might try something like this to see if you can brute force any of the passwords. There's also several things relating to web applications that you can also hack, and the most significant of those is always going to be SQL injection problems. This is the most common and successful method for hacking web applications. Now, what will happen here is you're going to be able to do some kind of SQL input and inject it into some kind of a form usually. This could be an order form, it could be a login page where you get a pop-up that asks for your username and password. There's various ways of kind of triggering or fooling that data. There's also URL tampering, that you can enter in a specific query into a URL, and then the web page will spit back out data that it was not supposed to reveal to you. You can also force a logon without any credentials. I'll show you that, by the way, I think in a demo here coming up. I can force it to get me a logon. You can also do this. I can drop the table. What that means is it's going to just dump out all of the data that I request from a specific table. Maybe the table's name is credit cards, for example, or social security numbers, or employee IDs, or usernames. You see, once you get this, drop table is kind of the holy grail of all SQL hacking, because you can really get all the data that you need at that point. There's several tools that will help with this as well if you really want to delve into it further. I don't think these are named specifically on the exam, but I just put them here for your reference. There's SQL Map and SQL Ninja. These are actually, a couple of these are actually Perl scripts that have been written. These are easily Googled if you want to find more information on these. Havij, that's a J on the end there, Havij, SQL Brute. These are all tools that are pretty well automated for doing various types of SQL injection, and pretty effective. Now remember, be careful to be honest and legal about all of this. Again, I want to remind you that I'm not asking you to do anything illegal here, but I will tell you that if you had an afternoon or a day where you just wanted to just randomly look for a bunch of websites and see which ones were vulnerable to these or some of the other things we've looked at, you will find something. There's enough weak ones out there that it's not as if you have to do months of research before you finally find one. If you're looking, you'll find it before very long. And then before we go into various demos, I just want to talk about some additional web apps hacking that you could do. Cross-site scripting is still a weakness that could come up. This is where you can force a script to perform something other than what was intended. So you can just kind of manipulate the actions that the website performs. You can execute the command without installing any software. That's one of the advantages of cross-site scripting. You don't have to upload, pwdump or something like that to do various functions. You can force it to do this without installing anything. Often this is going to be where the script will dynamically change the page based upon user input. Right offhand, I can't think of a good example, but maybe something like this. Let's say that you entered in that you were a resident of the United States. Maybe this is a web sign-up form of some type. And, you had United States. I'll put USA, I guess, up here. And then when you specify USA in one of the drop-down lists, it has Angola and, Afghanistan and all these other countries in there. But you picked the USA. And then over here to the right, there might be another drop-down list here with a little arrow down it. You've seen this kind of thing before. When you click it, depending on the country that you choose over here, then over here it's going to give you, I don't know, Beirut or Jerusalem or some other number of cities based upon the country that you chose, or number of states based on the country that you chose. Well, here, of course, this would have, Alabama, Arizona, other Alaska. I guess these aren't in order, but you get the idea. And it would have all of those based upon the country that I chose. Well, you can change these so that maybe you choose one specific kind of item right here, and you can forcibly, using cross-site scripting, change what it gives you on this list. So it's something different than what it was intended. That might come in handy if this is something like a price list. So you have maybe a expensive watch brand that you've chosen here, but you're able to pick from a price list on the cheaper watches. Okay, so this should give you some idea for how that kind of stuff can be worked out. What you want to look for, especially in exam purposes, is you want to look for this specifically. Okay, the less than script and then greater than tag. That's often going to be an indication, if you see any code with this in it in particular, often an indication of cross-site scripting. It might be legit, but very often it could be a hack attempt. Now, the best defense against this would be to disable JavaScript in the user's browser. And if you use something like Group Policy Objects in Active Directory with Internet Explorer, you can centrally disable that through some options there. All right, you ready to start hacking? Here's what we're going to do. We're using our backtrack machine, but you can use any distribution of Linux or Windows, and it pretty much works equally well across them all. And what I'm going to do is to use a utility called WebGoat. Now, why am I using something called WebGoat? It's actually a web page that you can use that's got built-in vulnerabilities in it. Now, why am I not using actual web pages that are out there on the public internet? Well, I actually know of a couple that have weaknesses. One of them has a specific SQL weakness that I could exploit. Another one has a problem with passwords that I could actually exploit as well. And one of them is from a major Ivy League school on the East Coast that I could just show it to you right now, and you would know what it was right away. And the other one's from another university system west of the Mississippi. That's as generic as I'm going to be. So anyway, I could hack those right now and show them to you, but that would put me on questionable legal ground to show you publicly accessible websites that you could hack. And I don't want to go back to prison, so I'm just going to use this WebGoat thing instead. Now, the way you use this is you download WebGoat. You can just Google for it. It's in a lot of different places. And it's actually from a specific location, which I'll put in the study guide, and you can click on the link there. And once you've downloaded it, you'll extract it. And then it's a shell, so you'll do an sh, and then followed by webgoat.sh. And then you have to start it on either port 80 or port 8080. I'm just going to use 80 for our purposes. And then you'll press enter here. Okay, and we'll let this thing run. Now you might be looking at it and say, okay, now what, James? It's kind of boring. I'm really not that impressed, James. It reminds me a lot of what I heard on the first date I went out with my wife. Anyway, so what we'll have here is nothing really going on the way it looks, but this is actually doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's running the website. It also gives you some clues here as to what you're supposed to do with this. You can go to this website here, HTTP, and then the local loopback address, WebGoat, and then attack. Now, here's one thing I want to point out very clearly to you. This is actually wrong, and this is wrong on many websites that I've seen, many how-to websites about WebGoat and so forth. Especially if you're using this in Linux, notice the capitalization of WebGoat. You can type that in all day long and you will not get to the website. It has to actually be all lowercase, not camel case, as you see here. And once you do that, I'll just refresh the screen here so you can see this. Then it will take you to the WebGoat web page. Okay, and this is actually the organization that creates this, and it creates this so you can do practicing of hacking websites. Then you'll just click Start WebGoat, and there you go. Now, the point of this, for the most part, is over here on the left. There's a lot of different vulnerabilities that you can click on, and then it gives you kind of a lab or an exercise in actually going through that hack. If you have a little bit of trouble with any of this, there's even some videos they've put out there on the internet that you can look at that show you the specific hack to do against the specific website that we're looking at here. However, be aware of the fact that there's a couple things going on with those videos. Number one, there's no voiceover. I don't know if that's because they're trying to protect their anonymity or something like that. They use all handles. They don't actually use their own username, at least not that I've seen in a couple of these. And also, they go extremely fast when they click on different stuff, and I actually have to pause the web page or pause the video and go through like one frame at a time. I don't know why they have to go so fast, but they do. Some people say that about me, and I apologize as well, but believe me, I don't go as fast as they go. Now, there's a couple of other things we need to do, and most of that relates to intercepting a post or a get. A couple of different ways of doing that. One of those would be this tamper item, and I'm just going to show you this one. This is called tamper data. This is actually an add-on that you can get for Firefox, and you do need to use Firefox for this particular one. You can see it right there. Just, again, Google for tamper data. You'll see it download. It's just an add-on, and it's quite easy to bolt on to Firefox. The other one would be something like Burp Suite, or you can also use another one called Web Scarab. But Burp Suite, Web Scarab, and Tamper Data, the point of them all is to intercept data. I'll turn this on. Intercept data, and then you can manipulate the stuff as it comes through. So, for example, the intercept is on right now, and then if I go back to my browser, I also need to work with another item here, and this is a proxy setting. This is called Foxy Proxy. You can also download this from the internet. And I just set up some various rules for Burp Suite and Web Scarab, depending on whichever one I'm using. For Burp Suite, for example, you can see here that I just on the first page I just named it. Proxy details are here. None of this is on the exam. I'm just telling you this for practical reasons because you'll have to know how to use this stuff in order to be able to do some of these demos yourself. And I do recommend you go through the WebGoat demos that we see here. And then there's the port that it uses, which is a common proxy port of 8080. Then on URL patterns, you can also edit this to be anything that has WebGoat. This means that anything with WebGoat that also has this URL pattern, it's going to send through this Foxy Proxy. Anything that's not matching any of this is just going to go through my normal channels and it's going to bypass the proxy. So if I went to msn.com or cbtnuggets.com or something like that, it wouldn't be using this proxy. Okay, so anyway, that's what all of that looks like, and again, I'll just choose whichever one I'm going to be using. Let me just go here with Burp Suite. So I'm just going to use proxy for all the URLs on Burp Suite. Okay, so to show you how this works, let me just refresh this page, and when I do that, I'm going to go ahead and just send it, doesn't matter. But notice that down here in the bottom, it says waiting, waiting for 127.0.0.1. Why is that? Well, the reason is because it's actually being held up right now by Burp Suite. It's holding on to it so that if I wanted to, I could go in here and I could modify some of this data. I could just type stuff in here for my own purposes. I'm going to just leave it the way it is, though, and forward it, and then it will go on ahead and work with it, and it releases the web page, so to speak. So now we're back to the website. All right, what are we going to work with first here? How about let's go over here to access control flaws and bypass a path-based access control scheme. Now, the idea here is kind of similar to the directory browsing idea or being able to access other portions of the website that were not directly intended to be able to see. For example, maybe there's a user's file that I want to be able to access. Here's all the files that I'm legitimately able to access. Okay, and maybe I'm supposed to access all of these files. And you can see here that the current directory is in this location. But maybe there's a couple of directories up in the hierarchy and over to a different directory that I want to actually see. Well, what can I do about that? Well, that's where we're going to take advantage of a path-based access control scheme. So just click a file, it doesn't really matter which one, and then you'll want to choose View File. Before we do that, I'm going to show you something else here. I'm going to use tampered data, and I'm going to manipulate some of this information. So I'm going to click Start Tamper, and I'm going to go down here, and just again, I can just choose something. It doesn't really matter what. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on this one, Basic Authentication, and View File. Now here it gives me this Tamper with Request prompt. I'm going to click on Tamper here, and then what I'll do is I'll go into this file here that says Basic Authentication, and I'm going to specify what I want to do instead of what it tells me to do. Okay, so I cheated a little bit because I already know the directory path, but normally what you'll do is you'll just do trial and error. You'll go 1 directory up, 2 directories up, 3 directories up, and so on. And you'll also probably type in this files that you think will be there. You don't always know that. There might be a passwords.txt file or a tomcatusers.xml file or something like that. There may also be, if they're using a default installation of IIS or Apache or whatever it is, then there's often files there that are already security sensitive that you usually should delete as a good security measure. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and just, do a few of these. Let's see, 3, 4. Let's do one more. And then I'm going to do a conf and then tomcat users.xml. Okay? And then I'll click OK. Now, this doesn't always work, so hopefully this will come through with something. Oh, I guess I did it. This is something else that I like about WebGoat here. It also tells you if you successfully were able to access whatever that was. So using this method, I was able to access the file that I typed in there. And they're also nice enough to actually put the file itself, the contents of it, further down here for me. So I can now see the names of the users and so on here. So very handy to have. And naturally, this is a deliberately insecure website, and so there's nothing security sensitive there because it's pretty easy. But you would use this on a pen test for a website that you're trying to test out. Okay, let's see what else we got. Let me just go ahead and stop this for the time being and move on to another item. How about some string SQL injection? Okay, so we can go to injection flaws. I think it's in here. String SQL injection. Let's do that. And then what we'll do here is, what we want to do is to identify a logon, or be able to log on as somebody. Okay, so here it says, enter your name. That's not what I was doing. Oh, I'm in the wrong place. I meant to click there. Sorry. So there we go. Because there's a drop-down list of users. That's what I was trying to find here. So there's these users that appear here, and I'm interested in managers or somebody that's higher level, a John Wayne admin or a Neville Bartholomew admin, somebody like that, right? So now what I'll do is I'm going to again use this tamper tool, and I'm going to go ahead and start tamper, and then I'm going to go ahead and just choose this login item. Okay, so I'm now going to go over to tamper. And then what I want to do is to go up here to password, and I'm going to enter an X single quote, excuse me, or single quote, A single quote equals A, single quote A, okay? So I know that's kind of convoluted, but what we're really looking for here is, and this is the key, where it says A equals A. You may also see this as 1 equals 1 or something else obvious like that. Now, what's that actually doing in terms of SQL? What we want to do is we want the logon process to evaluate something as true. If I had a legitimate password, I want to enter in that password, it would compare that against its database of passwords, and it would say, that is true. Password equals password, so to speak. It's a true statement, and once it sees true, it'll allow me in. What I'm doing here is I'm saying A equals A, right? Is that true? Well, of course A equals A. That's a true statement. Therefore, that should allow me to log in because it evaluates that statement as true. And you can see here then it says, welcome back, Neville. So I've now logged into this. I can search the staff. I can look up, I don't know, social security numbers, whatever else that I might be able to do using this kind of a hack. I was able to log in effectively without even having or knowing the password. All right, what other kind of fun can we have here? Let's go to improper error handling and fail open authentication scheme. And we're going to go ahead and, I'm just going to go ahead and submit this without tampering it right now. I'm just going to stop this and clear it, and then we'll start again here shortly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go down here and look. Oh, shucks. I don't know the username or password. Well, what is a common administrator login? Well, if they just use default values on many systems, it's admin, right? Okay, fine. So I'm going to go admin, and I'm going to go log in, and this time I'm going to tamper. But now I'm going to go up here to password, and look what I'm going to do here. Oh, that looks kind of weird. For some reason, the font or whatever is kind of hazy. I don't know why. But it says delete element. I right-clicked on password. Now I'm clicking delete element, and I click OK. And what happens? Welcome admin. Because it did not handle the error, it did not perform error handling, so it just logged me in without a password of any kind. Anyway, that's just a start of the various kinds of hacks you can do, and there's all these different ones over here on the left that you can go through, and I recommend that you do as many of these as you have the time and the energy for, because they're very, very useful. You know what? I feel like there's another one I wanted to show you. Oh, I know what it is. Let's try. I'm kind of just running off script here. There's another one I wanted to show you. Parameter tampering. Hidden fields is a good one. Let's try this one. Okay, this is a good example. Let me just submit this, and I'm going to turn this off while I show you this. Look, I could buy a 56-inch HD TV. My mother, I built an addition onto the back of my house, and my 94-year-old mother moved in with us. And her vision's getting very shady. She can't see very clearly anymore, so she needs a really bright TV. And she's actually looking for new TVs right now. So I'd say, you know, maybe she needs a new 56-inch television. Well, I can't afford $3,000 to buy her another television, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to hopefully make this price cheaper than $29.99, and I'm going to buy two of them, one for me and one for her. Okay, how would that be? Then I'm going to use another tool. Let's just try this. I'll just close this one for now. And I'm going to use the burp suite instead. I could use either one, but I'm just going to use this one instead just for sake of variety. And I'll turn the intercept on. Then I'm going to purchase this item. And now again, notice that it's waiting down in the lower left, waiting. Why? Because Burp Suite has intercepted this. And look what it says. The price is $29.99. Well, you know what? They just don't know my financial situation. I think it looks much better as $29.99. Wouldn't you agree? So I'm going to change the price to $29.99. And one thing I found is if you just change the decimal points, not a totally different price, like $28.75, then it's much less obvious as well. I say that as if I've done this before, and I assure you I have not. Anyway, I'll go ahead and forward this. And now, look, hey, I got two televisions, two HD televisions for only $59.98. And they're going to charge my credit card immediately. Kind of another cool thing about this is, who knows? I mean, even if they catch this, who's to say that I manipulated that data? Some packets could have gotten corrupt over the internet. You know, anything could have happened. Maybe it was the problem with their own web server. So a lot of different things. And anyway, pretty handy little way of manipulating data. In this nugget, we talked about web and SQL hacking. And before we got started, I talked to you about some of the last few exam objectives, or modules as they're called, in the Certified Ethical Hacker list. And we see that a lot of those are compressed into this particular nugget. Not for sake of expediency or anything like that, just they happen to overlap a lot. And also, many of them we've already addressed in previous nuggets. And then we talk about the architecture of the various web servers as well, such as Apache or IIS. And remember, what we've got now is web servers that are much more secure than they used to be, but you'll still be able to find some weaknesses. Also, we took a look at web hacks, SQL hacks, web application hacks, and so forth. And we concluded with some demos, which the most recent of which was where I was able to change the price on a specific item and make it my own price. In fact, I think I just found another way to get my wife beautiful, expensive jewelry without costing me an arm and a leg. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.